Hey everyone, I'm going to be making a libertarian case for certain slavery reparations. So I'm going to start out with something upon which we can all agree. So in 1945, my grandfather steals a car from somebody and immediately sells it to a drug dealer or something for $3,000. And then he gives that $3,000 to my father, and my father gives it to me. So in that case, it is stolen property that ought to be returned, right? So what we need to consider is the value of the $3,000, or the $3,000 car, converted to modern dollars, right? In that case, I would need to give back the exact dollar amount, because, considering inflation, the money has been inflating, sitting there for 70 years, right? So in that case, then it would be rather simple, right? Just give back the $3,000 to the man if he's still alive, or to his immediate descendant. So that's a simple enough case. But slavery, the reason we're not doing it is because it's so much more complicated. Because there's a bigger time frame associated with it, first of all. There are many generations in between, and that complicates it because some of the people who were passing down inheritances owned slaves, and others weren't. So we would need very careful accounting, looking back at inheritance papers. But say a man who had traded slaves all of his life, and had gotten all of his money through trading slaves and working them on land. Then certainly all of his money ought to be returned to slaves, right? Now, giving the money to someone is also difficult, because how do you know who actually was a slave? I mean, there are a lot of lost records there. Now, granted, some people get very detailed records, but we don't have that for everyone. So knowing from whom to take and to whom to give is a difficult process. So that would take a ton of bureaucracy. And keep in mind, taxation costs money. It's not as though tax people take people's money for free. The IRS has a budget. It costs money to take money. So the IRS, it has a budget. It's a lot of money to take money from other people. So that's also something to be considered. Is we're going to be dropping a ton of money trying to figure out just who is going to be who is owed money. It's not to say the money is owed any less, but it really questions whether we're going to come out as a net positive there, or if everyone in society, even the people who are the children of immigrants within the last 50 years, are going to be paying for things, trying to settle disputes from hundreds of years ago, right? So I don't think we're going to have the records for everybody. I think a lot of slave owners would probably try to destroy their records, and especially if they were worried about it, they would try to lie about it. And sifting through all the historical records, I don't know if it's something really we can do. So, not to say we shouldn't try, but I doubt that we actually can. And I think what a lot of people are saying is they're saying just give a ton of money to black people, just as a whole. What about all the black people who came here like in the last 100 years? They didn't directly experience slavery. Now, they probably knew a lot of people who were slaves, or were descendants of slaves rather. So they aren't owed any money from slavery. They weren't stolen, or nothing was stolen from them in that sense. But as for white people, I mean, a lot of white people didn't own slaves in the 1800s. In fact, the majority of white people didn't own slaves. It's only a very small percentage of them that owned slaves. So it's a very small percentage of the population that you'd have to track very carefully to find people. And if the money is like directly given to people, then that's an obvious thing. But I mean, there are a lot of cases in which the money might have been spent on education, and that's where it gets complicated. Like, do you really think it's okay to take money from people because it was given to them to pay for their education, and then with that expensive education they started earning money? And it seems difficult to quantify that and to see if all of the money was really preserved properly. So there are a lot of problems associated with this. Sifting through all this tax problems, all these reparation problems, is going to cost so much money that it's going to be taking a ton of money, a very substantial amount, from people who had no hand in, who were not victims and had no hand in creating the problem of slavery. Because a lot of the country's genetic population came here very recently, within the last 100 years. And 100 years ago, there wasn't slavery, right? So they couldn't have been complicit in slavery if they weren't even here 100 years ago. So their bloodlines aren't there. They have no claim to money, and they have no wrong committed against slaves, right? They had no slaves, therefore they don't have to pay reparations. And I think some people are just saying, well, it's such a grave injustice, just tax all white people. Like really, no, that is not just. I mean, if we're talking about actual reparations, it means that I have inherited something that I need to pay back. If my grandfather or my great-grandfather came here in the 1920s as a Luxembourgian child, then am I entitled, or am I required to pay for people who committed injustices in the 1800s when my bloodline wasn't even in this country at the time? No, that's not justice, clearly. No, I mean, I think you can be compassionate. I think you can try to help people. You can do private donations, but forcing people who weren't even, or whose families weren't even in the country, to give money to other people who may or may not have actually been slaves, and who might have participated in slavery at some point in their life, as we see some slaves, some slave traders actually were African. Um, so, so yeah, that, I mean, we need to consider that it's not just a black and white thing. Literally, just not black and white thing. There are people who were complicit in slavery after being freed. There are people who were never slaves but matched the genetics of people who historically were slaves. So there's so much complex stuff here. I don't see how there's any way we can actually look through history and figure out, without spending more money than we're going to be taking, figure out who took whose money and to whom it needs to be paid. For example, someone has several sons. Like, do we give a little bit to each son? Do we split it in the middle, or do we give it to the firstborn? So it would be so much bureaucracy with inheritance that it simply would be a net loss of money. And that net loss of money, all these bureaucrats are going to be paid almost certainly by everybody. You know, the government's not going to take out a loan and then pay that loan with just the money it takes in reparations. And the government isn't very efficient now in how it taxes money. You know, it costs money to tax money. So, I mean, having to look through all those historical documents, trying to sift through all the lies people are going to put forth to try to protect themselves and their legacy and all their money. So yeah, I mean, there's just going to be so many problems associated with it. I don't see how it's going to be a net benefit for anybody. So yeah, I mean, I think the only thing we can really do is just kind of put half an effort into it, and just say, well, this group probably has, on average, committed certain wrongdoings, and this group, on average, has been victimized. Therefore, we'll just take a certain amount of money from this group on average and give it to the average of another group. So I don't think that's fair at all. I think that's an injustice right there, to be wronging all the people in there who didn't participate in slavery. I mean, so many Americans are descended from Europeans who came to the United States in the 1900s. Like, so many of them. Like, Statue of Liberty, I mean, we had a ton of people coming here in the early 1900s. So why should they have to pay for it? And I think they're going to get caught in that net no matter how this goes down, because it will simply be too much work to actually look into who owes who money. So no, I don't think there's any proper way to do this. So even though it might morally be there, I just don't think we're going to be able to do it. So, yeah, you have a good day.